morning, good afternoon. Thank you for this honor to present the first paper in this series based on the Project Domestic Violence Survey. This is a joint work with Lvovskiy from Babych, Aleksandr Grigoryan from American University of Armenia, and Norberto Pignatti from ISET. And of course, the inspiration for the original idea also came from Jasper. So thank you very much, Jasper, for your for everything. And the title of the paper, Perceptions of Violence and Their Socio-economic Determinants, Comparative Analysis. So first of all, okay, oops, all right. All right, okay, I got it. So the first question we have to... Yeah, okay. The first question we need to ask is, how do perceptions matter? And of course, we know that intimate partner violence phenomena is multifaceted. So there are both physical and psychological forms that have been recognized, and it's really conceptualized as a form of coercive pattern of behavior that is meant to establish power control over the victim. So any systematic acts of physical as well as psychological pressure and restrictions have been recognized in the literature as a form of intimate partner violence. But the logical chain of IPV, we can think of starting from perceptions. First, you have to form a perception of whether or not a certain act is violence. That is followed by attitudes, whether you tolerate this kind of behavior, whether you justify it, and then the next step is action. So committing or not committing, seeking help for the victim, getting involved with the help. So perceptions are really at the basis of this logical chain, but the literature focuses mostly on the latter two links. So the determinants of IPV perceptions receive far less attention in the literature, and this is where our paper steps in. So socioeconomic determinants of IPV, what does literature have to say? Well, starting from the bottom of this slide, we know that the correlates such as low education, lower social status, unemployment, low income are shown to correlate with both the incidence of intimate partner violence and higher justification of IPV. Other factors such as gender and age are a bit more controversial. So for example, as far as gender, some studies reported gender symmetry in the incidence of IPV, while it is recognized that women are far more likely to sustain injuries, physical injuries, as a result of IPV. Then as far as attitudes, in relation to the very first paper that was presented here, some studies have shown that women actually tend to justify IPV more. But again, there is a great variation among countries or groups of countries. So age, once again, results are not consistent as far as attitudes. Some studies show higher justification of IPV among older adults, while in some groups of countries, actually younger people. So again, variation is there. Some interesting results have been shown for social capital or trust and IPV. The evidence showing tendency to show an increase in social capital decreases the likelihood, but again, I mean, it's sometimes not consistent. So it could be that in some neighborhoods where there is a great degree of trust, that these neighborhoods are knit together by more patriarchal and more conservative values, especially in some cultures or groups of countries. So this will be interesting also from the perspective of our paper. Okay, so basically you have seen already what Mikhail presented. There are 15 questions related to the perception of violence. That range from beating causing severe physical harm to prohibition of dresses one likes. And so we divide these, so when you answer yes to one of these questions, you receive the score of 1. So the maximum score you could receive is 15 if you perceive everything as well as a form of violence. But if you say no, or you refuse to answer, or do not know, you receive a score of 0. So sometimes people drop the do not know answers or refuse to answer, but we decided not to because these are really not random. So these are, there are some, we are doing an exercise to show that they have some other correlates. So in the group of physical violence, we identified 4 questions, and we can see that almost all countries in the sample have high perception of physical violence, but again with some countries higher and some countries lower. So you can see Georgia, Latvia, Poland, and Sweden. They are kind of form this group, one group, which is interesting, because Georgia is one of the countries with a more conservative culture and actually with the lowest gender equality in this group based on the UN Gender Equality Index. But emotional violence, we can see a bit more variation here. Armenia, Belarus, Russia among the lowest, and once again Sweden, Georgia, Latvia, Poland among the higher group. Restrictions as violence. So in this group, we have things like locking partner in the room, apartment, the house, prohibition to communicate with friends and relatives, and so on, prohibition to dress as one likes. So these are not really emotional or physical, something in between. And here you can see that you can also observe that there is a high difference between men and women that are perceived in the perception of these restrictions as violence. So once again, you know, Armenia, Russia, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. So, so this is, you know, not to be intimidated by this table. I will not spend too much time on it. Just a bird's eye view of our models and the regressors that we are using, or the variables. So you can see from here that we used age as one of the variables in our regressions. Gender, female versus male, higher the education variable is there. There's also employment variable, number of children, urban versus rural, trust in others. Bad environment refers to people reporting some noise or pollution in their environment, whereas bad social environment was crime in the neighborhood. And then there are country effects for, so we contrasted in our models Sweden for all 3 types of restriction, for all 3 types of violence, and a group of transition countries. This was really done to see what is the difference between Sweden, which is the country with the highest gender equality in our group and also in Europe, and our transition economy. So what some interesting things emerge from here. So first of all, age. Okay, we can see that younger people in transition economies, younger people tend to be more sensitive to all types of violence. And the reference group is 45 to 64 years old. And it really makes sense, for example, that adults older than 65 in the physical violence group, they are actually less sensitive than our reference group. But well, this is not the case always in Sweden. Another interesting point here is the difference between female and male. So being female indicates higher sensitivity to violence in all countries. It's very consistent. But the magnitudes of these effects are also interesting. So you can, for example, you can, for example, see that, not here, but yeah, somehow I don't show this slide, but yeah, the magnitudes in some countries like Georgia are closer to the difference between females and males are higher for Armenia and for and lower for Georgia, which is again not very consistent because Georgia and Armenia are closer culturally and they're in the same region. Just a second. So this is, employment, an interesting variable. So employment, once again, for Sweden doesn't matter much, employment status in terms of perceptions of violence. But for transition countries, it matters a lot. And in fact, for physical types of violence, it's more consistently, when we run regressions in individual countries, it's more consistently significant for all countries in our transition sample. So Ukraine, Latvia, Belarus, but emotional and restrictions significance here are driven by Georgia and Russia mostly. So not other countries. In other countries, these are less significant. Trust in others is another interesting variable. You can see that it's very important in transition economies, but not in Georgia and Armenia. This is once again comes to this literature where they say that neighborhoods where you can see more trust can also be tied together with more sort of patriarchal and more conservative values. So there is less perception, less sensitivity to violence. And this may be the case in particular in Georgia and Armenia. Finally, the determinants of country perception, violence perception, country effects. So this was done for the group of transition countries, and Poland really is the reference country here. So Poland is omitted, and the other countries are arranged in the order from least equal in gender, least gender equality to the greatest gender equality on the UN index. So, but interesting things, you can see that Georgia, which is the least equal, gender equal country in this sample, also is the closest to Poland in terms of, practically all coefficients, and Poland, which is the highest in this group in terms of gender equality. But the highest coefficient, the highest difference is between Russia and Poland, which is Russia is in the middle kind of gender equality index. So these are some of the things that we have observed, and I think I'm running out of time. So I will wrap up. Essentially, what the takeaways from this study so far is that the level of gender equality, as measured by the Gender Equality Index of the UN, doesn't consistently correlate with the awareness of perceptions of violence. So it may be that Georgia, for example, where a lot of attention has been paid to IPV on the media, it's very, very often in the news. So it may be that from the TV and from the media, rather than just the state of the gender equality policy. So another extension of this paper could be to look at the media reports of gender-based violence and to see how it correlates with perceptions. So we're in countries where we could see more media coverage, there could be a better awareness of what is going on. Another two interesting facts that we also to highlight is that higher education, for example, doesn't always mean that people are more sensitive to gender-based violence. This is especially true for Georgia and Armenia, where higher education has been so prevalent. So basically people receive higher education by default almost, and that doesn't really translate into higher perceptions. While higher education matters for all other countries in the transition group. Okay, I think I'll stop here just for the sake of time, and we can continue the discussion later.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jasja. And